Some people didn't just cross a line, they sprinted past it, burned the bridge, and now they're shocked there's no way back. My dear chosen ones, lean in for a moment, because this isn't just an introduction. This is a wake-up call, a reality check, and a psychological plot twist wrapped in truth. There comes a point in every chosen person's journey where life stops sending gentle warnings on your behalf and starts delivering consequences with receipts, timestamps, and undeniable accuracy. And right now, whether you can fully see it or not, the season you've entered is not coincidence, not luck, not random irony. It's accountability in motion, written in a language only those who tried to play with your soul can truly understand. Let's rewrite this title into something idiomatic, poetic, and unforgettable. When they stirred the beehive, they forgot they weren't wearing armor. Chosen one, I want you to understand something before we go any further. You were never just another character in someone's life. You were a turning point, a mirror, a catalyst, a shift, a lens that showed people what they were avoiding within themselves. But because you didn't roar, because you didn't clap back, because you didn't throw mud when they tossed dirt, some people assumed you were powerless, naive, or unaware. They mistook your emotional intelligence for emotional fragility. They mistook your peace for passivity. They mistook your silence for surrender. And now, the very energy they projected outward has circled back like a heat-seeking signal carrying their own signature. Chosen ones, here's the part that hits hardest. The very same mouths that once shouted your name like a punchline are now whispering it like a plot twist they regret participating in. Isn't it fascinating how people can boldly play villain when they believe there are no consequences, only to tremble once life starts holding up mirrors instead of excuses? Suddenly, they're baffled by why their plans glitch, why their peace evaporates, why their confidence feels recycled, or why their spirit feels heavier than their silence ever allowed them to admit. You may be wondering right now, why do they care now? Why does it bother them so much? It's because consequences are always louder when there's no one left to blame. When you walked away, you didn't take revenge. You took your energy. And that was the part they didn't realize was holding their life together more than their ego ever could. They thought distance meant freedom, but now life is teaching them that distance was actually exposure. Exposure to themselves without the disguise they wore around you. Let's be clear, my chosen ones. This isn't about celebrating someone's downfall. This isn't about being heartless, petty, or vindictive. This is about acknowledging the psychological law that even science agrees with. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It simply returns, recalibrates, and reveals. Some people didn't just underestimate your worth, they undervalued its impact on their own path. You were not their weakness. You were their stabilizer. You were not their crutch. You were their compass. You were not their problem. You were their pattern interrupter. Chosen ones, before we move forward, I need your support to keep this message alive and expanding. If you've felt this truth resonate inside you, if it awakened something powerful, or if it reminded you of who you really are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement isn't just a button click. It fuels the mission, strengthens the message, and allows us to continue creating empowering, life-shifting, energy-raising content for people just like you. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this community grow stronger. Stay with us. Your evolution matters here. And because they mishandled the one person who could have elevated them without competition, comparison, or manipulation, they are now haunted not by your presence, but by the version of themselves they can't sustain without you. Chosen one, let this fuel you, not freeze you. Let it sharpen you, not harden you. Every time someone tries to throw shade at a light carrier, they forget one crucial fact. Shadows only exist where there is light. You were never the darkness in their story. You were the illumination they didn't know how to respect. So if you're questioning your worth, don't. If you're wondering whether walking away was the right move, it was. If you're thinking maybe you should have explained more, you shouldn't have. Because chosen ones don't win through revenge, they win through evolution. So sit back, stay centered, breathe deep, and watch how life hands out the plot twist you never had to script. Their regret isn't your responsibility, your growth is. And remember, you were the piece they thought was boring until chaos became their only soundtrack. My dear chosen ones, if this message is already striking chords in places words usually can't reach, then don't just watch silently from the sidelines. Stay connected and locked in with us. Tap that like button, subscribe, and let this powerful community grow with voices that know what it feels like to be misunderstood, underestimated, and then suddenly proven right by life itself. Drop "Karma is real" in the comments if you're feeling the shift, and use super thanks if you want to help amplify messages like this into the world. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next will feel eerily familiar. Only true chosen ones will recognize every sign. Let's begin. Number 1. The shift began the second you chose silence over self-explanation. The turning point began the moment you chose silence over self-explanation. Some people only look tall because you kept kneeling to explain what they already understood. My dear chosen ones, let's tell the truth exactly as it is. Not everyone misunderstood you by accident. Some people pretended not to understand you because clarity would have required accountability. The moment you stopped trying to convince, justify, explain, teach, rescue, decode, translate, or soften your presence, the story changed. Something powerful happened the moment you realized, I don't owe my identity, intentions, or emotions to anyone committed to misreading me. That is when everything shifted, not emotionally for you, but energetically and psychologically for them. Chosen ones, hear this clearly. Your explanations were never just words. They were protection barriers they stood behind. When you explained yourself, they borrowed your insight to avoid the consequences of their behavior. When you shared your perspective, they used your emotional clarity to hide from their own chaos. When you demonstrated empathy, they weaponized your compassion and justified their avoidance. You weren't just talking. You were unconsciously carrying the responsibility they refused to face. You were the flashlight in a room they insisted on keeping dark, and when you finally switched the light off, they didn't just lose sight, they lost their hiding place. Chosen ones often ask themselves, why did everything suddenly fall apart once I pulled back? Because, my dear chosen one, you were the stabilizer disguised as the too emotional one. You were the logic behind their excuses, the balance behind their impulsiveness, the calm behind their storms, and the clarity behind their confusion. You didn't notice because you were too busy surviving emotional impact zones while trying to maintain peace. They were never strong. You were strong enough for both of you. When you stopped explaining yourself, life didn't punish them. Life simply gave them back the reins to their own choices. And that is where their story started to collapse. Your silence didn't create their downfall. Your silence revealed it. Without your emotional cushioning, every action they once redirected onto you ricocheted back into their reality. You didn't retaliate. You simply removed the emotional shields they never deserved in the first place. You might think, but why was silence so powerful? Because explanation is participation. And when you stopped participating, you withdrew your energy from a psychological system that relied on you to function. They didn't need your apology, your narrative, or your transparency. They needed your energy, and silence took that away. Let's reframe what truly happened, my chosen ones. You weren't giving up. You weren't being distant. You weren't acting different. You were ending your unpaid emotional labor contract. Some people didn't crumble because of karma. They crumbled because they finally had to meet themselves without your editing. When you spoke, you protected them. When you explained, you covered their tracks. When you forgave, you erased evidence. When you empathized, you softened their reality. When you left, life pressed play on everything they had paused. Imagine a person breaking a glass and walking away, believing someone else will sweep the shards. For the longest time, that someone was you. But the day you stopped sweeping, they had to walk barefoot and feel what they created. That wasn't revenge. That was reality no longer being filtered through you. Chosen ones, let's address the question that may still sit in your heart. Did I do the right thing by walking away silently? Yes, because clarity no longer needed conversation. It needed distance. Explanation is mercy, and you were no longer in the business of protecting people from their own patterns. Silence was not your escape. It was their exposure. Silence was not your weakness. It was your graduation. Silence was not your surrender. It was your boundary. And hear this final truth. Some people didn't fear losing you. They feared losing the version of themselves they could pretend to be while you were present. Chosen ones, your silence wasn't emptiness. It was a mirror. And nothing reflects reality more brutally than the absence of what once held everything together. Now sit with that power, because we're just getting started. Number 2. Interfering with a purpose-driven soul leaves echoes that don't fade. When they tampered with the wrong soul, they didn't realize the fallout would have echoes instead of endings. My dear chosen ones, here is a truth many people only understand when it is far too late. When someone interferes with your life, betrays your trust, or tries to disrupt your path, it is never just a moment. It becomes memory, momentum, and mirror. Some people handled you carelessly because they believed you were temporary, forgettable, or replaceable. They assumed that whatever they said, did, or plotted against you would fade, dissolve, or disappear as time moved forward. To them, it was a moment of ego, entertainment, or emotional impulse. To the universe, to life's natural balance, and to the laws of energy, it was a logged event with lasting impact. They thought walking away meant walking free, but tampering with a chosen one is like throwing ink into water. Its presence will always remain visible, no matter how much someone stirs, denies, or distracts you. Chosen one were not just another personality in their storyline. You were a pivotal energy source, a turning point, a catalyst for direction. When they interfered with that, they didn't just hurt your feelings, they damaged their own trajectory without realizing that actions toward people like you do not evaporate, they echo. You see, chosen ones carry something different, something that people can feel even if they cannot explain. Your presence lingers, your words linger, your absence lingers. You are not the type of person someone collides with and then simply forgets. Your energy is high impact, high frequency, and high memory. When someone tries to sabotage a chosen one, they are not just playing with a moment. They are signing a long-term emotional contract with consequences that do not expire when their guilt does. And here's the hard-hitting truth, my dear chosen one. People only regret actions when they finally realize the cost. They didn't know that betraying you was essentially betraying their own evolution. They didn't know that lying to you would become a stain that lies to them later. They didn't know that mistreating you would create a permanent dent in their energetic integrity. Some of them are now confused, whispering questions like, why do things feel heavier? Why does nothing flow like it used to? Why do I feel blocked no matter what I try? Why do familiar cycles keep repeating? And the answer is simple. Echoes. Echoes don't leave until the lesson is understood, corrected, or confronted. Echoes don't fade just because someone pretends they did nothing. Echoes don't disappear just because they stop talking about it. Life has a flawless memory, even when people practice selective amnesia. They once believed mocking you was harmless humor, but now they feel mocked by their own decisions. They once believed manipulating you was strategy, but now they feel manipulated by life itself. They once believed embarrassing you made them powerful, but now they feel exposed without anyone saying a word. Chosen ones, understand this. You were the test they failed, not the obstacle they defeated. Your soul, your aura, your presence is like a recording device with no off switch. It collects data through intuition, emotional intelligence, and spiritual awareness. You didn't have to seek revenge, speak out, expose them, or prove anything. Your evolution became their reminder. Every time they see someone winning, growing, healing, or glowing, they are inevitably reminded of the version of themselves they refused to become when they had access to you. What they thought was temporary behavior has turned into a permanent echo chamber, one where every choice, every lie, every insult, and every betrayal plays back like a looped soundtrack that won't stop until they finally confront what they avoided. And you, chosen one, must understand this so you never question why people suddenly become distant, numb, anxious, or emotionally unstable after mishandling you. It's not you, it's their echo catching up. This is not revenge. This is not punishment. This is alignment, cause and effect, energetic symmetry. Echoes remain until self-awareness replaces denial. So, chosen one, walk forward with confidence. Not arrogance, not bitterness, not pride, but awareness. The impact of who you are cannot be undone, and those who tamper with that reality will eventually understand one universal truth. You were never the person they could play with. You were the person whose memory would play back forever. Number 3. Life is now showing them the unfiltered reflection they tried to avoid. Life isn't attacking them. It's handing them a mirror they can no longer escape. My dear chosen ones, here's a truth that cuts deeper than revenge, deeper than silence, and deeper than separation. What they are facing right now isn't life trying to punish them. It's life finally showing them the truth they've spent years dodging, not through loud storms or dramatic disasters, but through reflection, the kind that can't be muted, can't be ignored, and definitely can't be redirected. When you were in their life, your presence acted like a soft filter, smoothing over their contradictions, excuses, and unhealed wounds. They didn't realize it then, but you weren't their emotional opponent. You were the invisible buffer shielding them from their own reflection. You see, chosen ones naturally carry clarity, emotional intelligence, empathy, awareness, and deep perception, qualities that operate like mirrors whether you intend them to or not. When someone with unresolved issues stands in front of a person like you, they can't help but feel exposed, even if you never point a finger or mention a single flaw. Your emotional maturity silently reveals their immaturity. Your inner stability makes their chaos impossible to rationalize. Your honesty turns their manipulation into tangled knots. Your loyalty highlights their inconsistency like high-definition truth in a world built on blurry excuses. Without you even trying, their mask begins to crack. That's why they needed you to be the problem. That's why they pushed narratives, twisted meanings, and exaggerated flaws. Because as long as you looked like the issue, they didn't have to face the reality that their biggest enemy was their own unworked-on self. They didn't dislike the real you. They disliked the version of themselves that showed up in your presence. At first, they were able to avoid accountability because they had you to soak up, translate, adjust, and take responsibility for emotional weight that didn't belong to you. But chosen ones, life doesn't operate on permanent unfairness. It works on clarity and balance. And so the day you stepped away, withdrew your emotional labor, removed access, or simply stopped over-functioning, life didn't suddenly become harsh. It simply became real. Now they're learning the most uncomfortable form of karma, self-confrontation. People expect karma to look like misfortune, losing jobs, relationships, status, or stability. But the heaviest karma is actually internal. When a person finally becomes aware of the damage they caused, the patterns they repeated, the excuses they created, and the emotional shortcuts they depended on. What feels like bad luck to them is really the absence of someone who once cleaned up their emotional mess faster than they could create it. My dear chosen ones, this part may shock you, but it's the psychological truth. They never feared losing you. They feared meeting themselves without you there to dilute the truth. Now, life is handing them back every trait they projected onto you. The jealousy they swore belonged to you is now ruining their connections. The manipulative tactics they used to maintain control are now backfiring and making them feel powerless. The lies they told so casually are now breaking their reputation faster than they can defend it. Their own attitude, not life, has become their punishment. They once said you were too sensitive. Now they feel every emotion with no regulation. They once called you dramatic. Now they live in overthinking loops they can't turn off. They once claimed you were overreacting. Now they crumble under pressure they used to mock. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. And chosen ones, this is where your confidence rises. They are not suffering because life is cruel. They are suffering because life finally removed the human shield they never appreciated. What you must realize now is that your absence is not empty. It is powerful. It forces clarity, accountability, and emotional exposure. Without someone to absorb the hit, the impact goes straight to its original creator. For the first time, they must sit with themselves, and they're learning that silence is far louder than arguments, loneliness is far heavier than blame, and self-awareness is far sharper than denial. They are not haunted by your name. They are haunted by the truth they once tried to assign to you. Remember, chosen one, some people don't break because life attacked them. They break because they finally ran out of ways to avoid themselves. Now breathe, sit tall, and keep moving forward. Because your evolution is the part they never saw coming. Number 4. Their downfall came from mishandling access, not your advancement. Their downfall didn't come from your rise. It came from how carelessly they handled their access to you. My dear chosen ones, let's make this point very clear, very loud, and very honest. People didn't fall apart because life suddenly decided to favor you. They fell apart because they mishandled a level of access they never should have taken lightly. Access to you was not a casual invitation. It was not a hallway pass. It was not a temporary backstage wristband that could be tossed aside. It was a rare clearance level that many people received without realizing the gravity of what they were stepping into. Some people thought they had entered a playground, when in reality they had stepped into a vault, a laboratory, a growth chamber, a transformational environment that required respect, awareness, maturity, and honesty. Chosen ones, your presence was never normal. When someone gained access to you, they were accessing clarity they didn't have, safety they couldn't create, loyalty they didn't know how to maintain, and emotional depth they were not trained to handle. They were tasting peace without earning discipline. They were experiencing alignment without developing self-awareness. They were receiving guidance without building accountability, and that is where their downfall began. They assumed your value was everyday value simply because you delivered it with humility instead of performance. They assumed you were common because you treated them with generosity instead of superiority. They confused quiet power with lack of importance. What caused their downfall was not your elevation. It was their assumption that access came without responsibility. They didn't lose you because you were too much. They lost access because they were too careless. People forget something crucial. Access to someone like you is a privilege that always reveals character. Some people protect what they're given. Others play with it until it breaks, then pretend they don't know what happened. They are now learning that the downfall wasn't punishment. It was the bill attached to their behavior. Chosen ones, when people had access to you, they received emotional safety, the kind of safety that could make the loudest mind quiet and the most chaotic heart steady. They received encouragement that didn't come with manipulation. They received truth that didn't come with humiliation. They received loyalty that didn't require perfection. You did not demand people to be flawless. You only needed honesty, effort, and respect. Yet some individuals treated your heart like a free trial, your wisdom like background noise, and your presence like a backup plan. And just like every trial, freebie, shortcut, or loophole, it eventually expired. They didn't understand that you weren't giving attention, you were giving access. And there is a massive difference. Attention is common, access is curated. Attention is replaced, access is remembered. Attention can be shared, access is limited. They did not break your identity, but they failed the interview for the upgraded version of themselves that could have evolved beside you. Chosen ones don't ever forget. When someone connects with you, they aren't just interacting with a person, they are interacting with a pathway, a mindset, a frequency that upgrades environments. When you walk away, you don't just leave physically. You take with you the clarity, the stability, the emotional GPS, the mental sharpness, the intuitive protection, the silent healing, and the environmental elevation you brought. And when those elements disappear, people finally experience who they are without your influence masking their flaws. Their life didn't start collapsing because you got lucky. It started collapsing because you stopped holding the weight they hid from themselves, using your presence. What looked like downfall was simply the difference between living supported versus living exposed. When you left, everything they mismanaged started revealing itself, like furniture marks on a carpet after the couch is moved. It doesn't matter how long it was covered, the imprint still exists. So, chosen ones, hear this final truth. They weren't punished for losing you. They punished themselves by not valuing what came with you. Their regret is not rooted in your absence alone. It is rooted in the realization that they will never again experience that version of themselves that only existed in your presence. Their downfall was not your victory. It was their unfinished growth. And that, chosen ones, is what they wish they had understood before they treated something priceless like something replaceable. Number 5. They weren't battling who you were, they feared who you were becoming. They never feared who you were, they feared who you were becoming. My dear chosen ones, let's peel this truth back layer by layer, because this one hits deeper than betrayal, deeper than envy, and deeper than misunderstanding. Many people didn't target you because of who you were at that time. They targeted you because of the future shadow you cast without even realizing it. You were still doubting yourself, still learning, still healing, still piecing together your identity, yet they reacted as if you were already standing on a global stage, crowned, confident, and unshakable. They weren't intimidated by your present chapter. They were terrified of the book they could sense being written behind it. Some people can smell your future before you can even describe it, and their fear reveals what you're destined for before you know it yourself. You need to understand something. Chosen one, insecure people don't wait for proof. They react to potential. They don't panic when you win. They panic when they realize you can. They don't envy what you have. They envy what they know you're capable of having. And the wild part? They felt it before you did. They didn't need a milestone, a trophy, a viral moment, a breakthrough, or a spotlight. They sensed it in your energy, your mindset, your resilience, your ideas, your curiosity, your values, your silence, your empathy, your inner fire. You didn't have to brag, prove, or show anything. Your existence already radiated evolution. Chosen one, think back. Wasn't it strange how some people treated you like competition when you didn't even know there was a race? Didn't it confuse you how they reacted as if you were already a threat, even though you were struggling, unsure, or building quietly? That's because they saw the seed form and panicked about the harvest. They saw the blueprint and feared the skyscraper. They saw your self-awareness and predicted your transformation. They saw your emotional intelligence and foresaw your leadership. They saw your discipline emerging and predicted success that couldn't be reversed. They weren't fighting the current reality, they were fighting the future headline. You ever notice how certain individuals tried to discourage you before you even started? How they laughed at your dreams before you explained a single detail? How they mocked your interests before you turned them into skills? How they undermined your healing before you even understood what trauma meant? That wasn't coincidence. That was panic disguised as sarcasm, cruelty, or dismissiveness. Some people didn't want you to believe in yourself because they already believed in you, and that scared them. Let's make this brutally clear, chosen one. You weren't underestimated. You were prejudged for your success. They tried to tear down your confidence so you'd never activate it. They tried to keep you questioning yourself so you'd never strengthen your identity. They tried to distract you so your future would never manifest. People with small internal capacity become threatened by those who carry big internal potential. And here's the irony that karma is now replaying on their timeline. Everything they did to delay you prepared you instead. Every attempt to block you became training. Every insult became motivation. Every betrayal became clarity. Every setback became structure. They didn't destroy you. They accidentally built the version of you they feared the most. They thought stopping you meant winning, but all it did was expose how deeply they felt inferior in your presence. They didn't want you to outgrow them because they knew the moment you evolved, their influence over you would dissolve. Their worst fear was not your failure, it was your emotional independence. Because once you no longer needed validation, their manipulation expired. Once you gained clarity, their confusion lost power. Once you saw your worth, their opinion lost influence. The real panic wasn't about losing you, it was about losing the control they hoped to maintain over your identity. But here's where karma enters with poetic precision. They now have to watch the future they tried to sabotage become the reality they can't escape witnessing. Watching you rise hits harder when they once tried to keep you small. Watching you find peace hits harder when they once tried to create chaos. Watching you evolve hits harder when they once celebrated your struggle. Now they see it clearly. They were never battling a weak version of you. They were sparring with your potential, and potential always wins. My dear chosen ones, if people seemed unnecessarily competitive, cold, jealous, dismissive, threatened, or cruel without logical reason, understand this truth deeply. They saw the champion in you long before you believed it existed. And now, the very future they feared is becoming the reality they regret ever fighting. Number 6. The energy they weaponized is now precision-guided back toward them. The very energy they fired at you has returned like a boomerang with unforgiving precision. My dear chosen ones, let's make this brutally clear. Nothing they ever did to tear you down vanished into thin air. It didn't vanish, dissolve, disappear, evaporate, or get lost in the wind. Energy does not retire. It does not forget. It does not drift into a void of no longer matters. Energy behaves like a loyal delivery system. It may not knock immediately, but it always finds its way back to the original sender with impeccable accuracy, especially when it was packaged in hate, envy, sabotage, or deceit. They convinced themselves that because you didn't react, life never heard it. What they failed to understand is that silence is not the absence of consequences. It is the incubation period. While they thought they were simply throwing shade, whispering rumors, or planting seeds of doubt about you, they were unknowingly building a case file against themselves. Not a legal case, not an emotional case, an energetic one. Every rumor was logged, every smear was documented, every attempt to lower your value became an entry in their own record, not yours. They thought they were burying you, but in reality, they were burying evidence, with their fingerprints all over it. See, chosen ones, people like this never consider timing. They think immediate silence equals immunity. They confuse delayed consequences with no consequences. They look at your calmness and label it weakness, when really it was simply non-participation. You didn't engage because you didn't need to. You didn't chase correction because truth corrects itself, and you didn't fight back because you are wired to win through growth, not warfare. What they didn't know is that life has a surgical way of returning energy, not in chaos, but in precision, detail, and poetry. And now the very blueprint they created has become their own roadmap to discomfort. While they were laughing, gossiping, and looking for people to agree with their false narrative, the energy was already circling, calculating its return angle. Just because the package didn't arrive instantly didn't mean it wasn't labeled, sealed, and shipped. They planted seeds thinking you would harvest the pain, but the harvest was never yours. It was theirs, long before they even dug the soil. Chosen ones, let me tell you how poetic this gets. The relationships they intentionally tried to destroy for you are now falling apart in their own connections. The lies they created to make you seem unstable are now being questioned about them. The reputation they tried to stain is now glowing stronger, while theirs quietly corrodes. They didn't realize that credibility, once punctured, doesn't patch up easily, especially when you cause the puncture yourself. And now they are stuck in rooms where their own words echo back louder than anyone else's opinions. They once took pride in being ahead of you, smarter than you, or more respected than you. Yet life is humbling them in rooms they once felt superior in. This isn't random misfortune. This is energetic symmetry. Life doesn't throw consequences like darts. It returns them like reflections. What they are facing is not punishment, but precision-based return energy. It's not revenge, it's response. They weren't attacked, they were mirrored, and the mirror never distorts, it only reveals. Chosen one, I know you may wonder, why didn't life expose them sooner? Because exposure without proof only becomes argument. But exposure aligned with consequences becomes revelation. They didn't just shoot arrows at you. They dipped those arrows in their own insecurities. And now those same arrows are returning to their doorstep with their name, not yours, engraved on the shaft they thought dimming your light would make theirs brighter. But now they're learning that life is not a light switch. It's a reflection field. If you try to fog someone's clarity, you choke your own visibility. And here is the quiet truth that stings the most for them. You didn't do anything to them. They did it to themselves. You just stopped cushioning the consequences. Their downfall is not because they targeted a chosen one. It is because they forgot that every intention is an invoice, and life always charges the correct account. So, breathe, chosen one. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was the tracking number. And the package has finally been delivered. Number 7. Your pain wasn't weakness. It was evidence being silently recorded. They thought your pain made you weak, not knowing it became recorded evidence. My dear chosen ones, this part cuts deep. because it's one of the most misunderstood realities in your journey. There was a chapter of your life where people watched you hurt, and instead of pausing, softening, or reflecting, they advanced. They saw your pain like a window of opportunity, a moment where your defenses were low, your heart was exposed, and your voice was silent. They assumed you were too distracted by heartbreak to notice the fine print of betrayal happening in real time. They thought they were getting away with things because you didn't react, argue, expose, or retaliate. They didn't realize your silence wasn't surrender, it was surveillance. Chosen ones, what they failed to recognize is that pain doesn't shut you down. It sharpens you. Your heartbreak wasn't just an emotional moment, it was a recording device. Every tear became a timestamp. Every disappointment became documentation. Every accusation, lie, manipulation, or cold shift in tone became part of a psychological archive. And while they believed you were too overwhelmed to catch it, you were quietly downloading who they were behind the version they performed. You see, when ordinary people are hurt, they tend to react impulsively. But when a chosen one is hurt, something different happens. Their inner world becomes hyper-aware. Pain heightens perception. Your senses became sharper. Your intuition became louder. Your understanding of patterns became clearer. While they thought they were hiding behind charm, excuses, or fake innocence, your emotional radar was catching everything down to the tiny changes others would overlook. Tone, timing, facial expression, body language, inconsistent stories, convenient excuses, subtle guilt shifts, and last-minute reversals. What they thought you missed, you memorized. My dear chosen ones, heartbreak didn't blind you. It removed the fog. You couldn't unsee what you saw. You couldn't unfeel what you felt. You couldn't unknow what you learned. They thought your tears were signs of emotional defeat, but really they were evidence that your empathy had reached its limit. And once a chosen one reaches that limit, they transform. Pain became your turning point, not your tomb. The irony here is that they thought the moment you were breaking was the moment they were winning. They had no idea that the more you hurt, the more precise your clarity became. You started observing patterns that previously seemed harmless. You connected dots they assumed were scattered. Your silence wasn't confusion, it was processing mode. You were not emotionally paralyzed, you were analyzing. And chosen one, let's address a truth many people are not ready to admit. Your pain was never a weakness. It was an X-ray machine. You saw through character, not covers. You saw through excuses, not edits. You saw through intentions, not explanations. And because you felt it deeply, you remembered it accurately. Now here's where the karma part ties back to our title, Chosen One. Everybody involved is getting karma, wishing they just left you alone. While you healed, detached, evolved and rebuilt, life began pressing play on everything they assumed would disappear. The same indifference they had when you needed care is now circling back to them during their most vulnerable moments. The same emotional distance they treated you with is now the same emotional climate they're surrounded by. The same disregard they gave is now the same treatment they can't escape. They thought you healed and forgot, but they are now reliving what they once minimized. And let's be clear, you didn't cause their consequences. You didn't curse them, expose them, sabotage them, or seek revenge. All you did was stop protecting them from themselves. Once your energy was no longer buffering their emotional decisions, life simply gave them the unfiltered version of their own actions. They thought your pain disappeared once you stopped crying. They didn't know pain transforms. It becomes memory. It becomes discernment. It becomes boundaries. And eventually, it becomes karma's blueprint. You didn't need to say a word. Their own patterns exposed them. They believed time erases things, but time only develops the film. So, chosen one, understand this with full confidence. You were never weak. You were witnessing. You were never breaking. You were gathering truth. You were never lost. You were leveling up. And now, they are not haunted by you. They are haunted by what they did when they thought you weren't looking. Number 8. Their real awakening is realizing you were never the disruption. The real plot twist. You were never the problem. They just weren't built for someone like you. My dear chosen ones, let's peel back the emotional layers and reveal the truth that hits harder than any dramatic consequence life could ever deliver. The real karma was never about what they lost. It was about what they finally realized. And that realization is this: you were never the issue. They simply were not prepared, equipped, or emotionally developed enough to handle someone operating at your depth, your awareness, your honesty, your intuition, and your authenticity. You weren't a challenge to defeat. You were an upgrade they didn't know how to download. See, chosen ones, when someone hasn't built the emotional bandwidth, communication skills, self-awareness, or inner stability to match your frequency, they start rewriting the narrative, not because you're wrong, but because it's easier to label you too much than to admit they were not enough. They implied your standards were unrealistic, but deep down, they knew it was their effort that was inconsistent. They acted like your sensitivity was exaggerated, but in reality, your intuition detected what they were trying to hide. They said you were dramatic, intense, or difficult, but what they actually meant was this: you see too much, feel too much, know too much, and I'm not ready to face myself. You became a mirror, chosen one, and mirrors do not lie, they reflect. And while everyone loves the idea of being seen, not everyone can handle being exposed. Some people only want mirrors that flatter them, not the ones that reveal the unpolished truth. When they encountered you, they didn't meet a person. They met their emotional unfinished business. You reflected their inconsistencies, their fears, their insecurities, their lack of accountability, and their unhealed patterns. Without even trying, you challenged every version of themselves they crafted for the outside world. And let's be real, people don't get upset at what they don't recognize. They get upset at what they can't escape. They didn't react negatively because you were wrong. They reacted negatively because you made the truth unavoidable. You weren't judging them. Your very existence highlighted the gap between who they pretended to be and who they actually were. Every time you spoke with integrity, it contrasted their avoidance. Every time you loved deeply, it magnified their emotional shortcuts. Every time you sought clarity, it exposed their internal confusion. Every time you tried to grow, it revealed their stagnation. That kind of reflection is not easy to face, especially for people who have spent years perfecting emotional acting skills instead of emotional growth. So instead of elevating, they retreated. Instead of admitting, they deflected. Instead of learning, they blamed. Instead of rising, they resisted. Instead of matching your energy, they tried to drain it, because draining is easier than developing. Chosen one, here's the twist. The real karma is not misfortune, punishment, or public downfall. It's inner realization. External consequences can be ignored, denied, or blamed on circumstances, but internal awareness. That one sits with you everywhere you go. It sleeps with you, wakes with you, speaks to you in silence, and follows you like a shadow that refuses to detach. They are not haunted by what you did. They are haunted by what they refused to become when they had access to you. They once believed pushing you away was power, not realizing they were pushing away the only relationship where growth, honesty, emotional maturity, and elevation were actually possible. And now they are grieving, not you, but the version of themselves they could temporarily perform while you were present. They miss the improved identity they rehearsed with you, but cannot sustain alone. Chosen one, Hear this deeply. They didn't lose you. They lost who they were capable of becoming while you were in their life. And that is a kind of loss that echoes internally, not externally. You were not a chapter. You were a turning point. Not everyone is prepared for that type of person, and not everyone knows how to value that type of access. So now, life has given them the one thing they never expected, but desperately needed, the unfiltered mirror they can no longer walk away from. And that, chosen one, is a karma far more powerful than anything you could ever say or do. Number 9. They didn't only lose you, they lost the alignment your presence once activated. When they lost you, they lost the environment that made their life make sense. My dear chosen one, here is a truth most people never realize until it's far too late. Losing someone like you is not the same as losing an ordinary connection. When people exit your life or sabotage their access to you, they naively assume all they are walking away from is a person, a conversation, a friendship, a relationship, or a bond. They believe they are only losing your physical presence, your communication, or your availability. What they fail to understand, the part that only becomes clear when consequences begin to unfold, is that losing you triggers a full internal and external shift. Your absence is not simply emotional, it is environmental, psychological, and energetic. They didn't just lose you as a person, they lost the alignment, stability, growth, focus, and clarity that came attached to you. You were not just someone who existed in their life. You were someone who improved the quality of their inner and outer world without needing recognition, applause, or credit. Chosen ones naturally carry a different atmosphere. You don't enter people's lives quietly. You alter their emotional climate without trying. When you are present, things seem to flow with more order. Decisions become easier, the mind feels lighter, and problems become manageable. Ideas arrive with clarity, opportunities start aligning, and even chaos becomes organized. Many people experienced life feeling smoother around you, but never stopped to question why. They assumed things were getting better because circumstances were shifting, luck was improving, or their own efforts were finally paying off. They never paused to consider that you were the variable that changed the entire formula of their life. Your energy wasn't luck, your presence was the catalyst. Without knowing it, they were benefiting from your emotional intelligence, intuition, positive influence, self-awareness, healing nature, and inner alignment. They reaped the rewards while assuming they were self-generated. That's why, chosen one, when they mishandled you through lies, betrayal, manipulation, disrespect, neglect, jealousy, competition, or underestimation, they didn't just hurt your heart, they disconnected themselves from the only stabilizing force they never knew they needed. They walked away believing they would be perfectly fine, only to later discover that the equilibrium they depended on was never theirs in the first place. The peace you carried acted as a cushion to their chaos. The emotional clarity you offered served as their internal navigation. The wisdom you shared functioned as their hidden rulebook. The support you provided operated as an invisible safety net. Once your presence was gone, the infrastructure you unknowingly maintained collapsed piece by piece. Not because you wished them harm, but because they were never built to sustain that level of emotional or energetic balance on their own. Suddenly, their thoughts became heavier because your insight was no longer refining them. Their plans began falling apart because your stabilizing influence was no longer reinforcing their direction. Their relationships became harder to maintain because your emotional regulation was no longer setting the tone. Their opportunities dried up because your energy was the unspoken force that opened doors they could not open alone. Their life became louder, messier, and more confusing because your presence once served as a filter that made everything make sense. They thought losing you meant losing communication, but what they actually lost was alignment. They thought losing you meant losing a chapter, but what they actually lost was the co-author who kept their story balanced. They thought losing you meant losing a companion, but what they really lost was the environment that allowed them to become a better version of themselves. And here's the part that stings them the most, chosen one. They didn't just lose who you were in their life, they lost who they were able to be because of you. The version of themselves that appeared more confident, stable, aware, hopeful, disciplined, inspired, or emotionally mature only existed in proximity to your energy. Without you, they reverted. Not because they wanted to, but because there was nothing left to elevate them. People often believe they are becoming better alone, when in reality they are simply reflecting the influence of someone powerful who is quietly holding their life together. The moment that reflection disappears, they are forced to confront the truth they never acknowledged. You were the advantage they took for granted. So no, chosen one, they didn't just lose you. They lost peace disguised as conversation, support disguised as empathy, protection disguised as presence, and transformation disguised as love. And sooner or later, they will realize. Some losses are not reversible. Some access does not reset, and some people can only be met once. They lost you, and with you, they lost growth they didn't know was borrowed. That realization will, and now, chosen ones, as we bring this message to a close, let this truth settle in your mind with clarity and confidence. What left you was never a loss. It was a reset. You didn't lose people, you released weight. You didn't lose connections, you protected your purpose. The next chapter belongs to you, not to those who mishandled their access. If this spoke to your spirit, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop 77 in the comments to confirm your alignment. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs the reminder. The chosen rise differently.